today's schedule?
Tennis lesson at 10 a.m.
Right. Call a taxi for me.
Sure, it'll take about 10 minutes.
Pe măsură ce avansează tehnologia, unele lucruri încep să stagneze. Nu mai avem atât de multe inovație când vine vorba de televizoare sau chiar la telefoane. Și am stat de vorbă cu un specialist care mi-a explicat care este etapa următoare în domeniul tehnologiei. Adevărata evoluție, următoarele mari inovații în domeniul tehnologic încep să fie cele legate de casă, de smart home. Dacă în ultimii 10 ani am tot auzit despre mașini electrice, despre cum o să devenim toți full electrici și lucrurile încă nu s-au întâmplat, e bine, nu se întâmplă la fel de repede nici când vine vorba de casa inteligentă. Dar începem să vedem tot mai multe demonstrații despre cum putem să avem case integrate de la mai mulți producători. Am stat de vorbă cu unul dintre cei mai buni specialiști pe care îi cunosc în domeniul tehnologiei și am un interviu special pe care cred eu că merită să-l urmărești ca să înțelegem care este următorul pas în acest domeniu. Hai să-l ascultăm împreună pe Paul Gray, unul dintre cei mai buni cercetători din domeniul tehnologiei. Paul Gray, always a pleasure talking to one of the greatest. I'm hearing you're closely retiring from the field work, going through factories and doing intelligence.
Yeah, I'm continuing. I'm continuing to stay in the industry. I'm shifting some of my priorities, but no, I'm still around.
Okay, so one of the greatest guys in the industry that who can tell you what comes next in terms of mostly screens. That's that's your best work, let's say.
It's my passion. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump right into it and tell me why are foldable smartphones so expensive?
They're difficult to make. I think is a real simple answer. That, of course, it's not just about the display. That you have to engineer a hinge to protect the display.
Yeah.
You don't want to twist it or bend it and things like that and warp it. And so as a result, you end up with a lot of extra mechanical components that have to be very accurately made.
Okay.
To produce a hinge. Of course, there's also a lot of things that the industry is not so well tooled up to make those things as they've been making flat phones for 20 years.
No moving parts.
Yeah, it's no moving parts. It's very robust. There's a lot less mechanical components in there. So I think that's the main one. And of course, the industry is less mature at actually making such things. So you haven't driven the cost out. You haven't found the best way of doing things in the way that the rest of the phone industry has been at it for so long and there's so much more experience.
So what do you think? Is the hinge that's more expensive or the actual screen bending?
It's the hinge.
It's the hinge
now, yeah. Wow. This is a lot of precision mechanical stuff. And I don't think you can really separate the two. It is a system. The display without a hinge is you can twist it and break it.
So when they actually when they first doing those, it was like a 2 centimeter
That's
hinge,
right. Yeah.
and now it's under 9 millimeters.
Right. So when it first happened, it was like a teardrop, and that was to minimize the controlling the radius. You didn't want it to like a paper fold.
Yes.
As people have got the displays better and better and better, then you have less and less of the teardrop shape.
Yes.
And that's where you've seen that. And you remember the first hinges look kind of like a caterpillar track.
Yeah.
And lots of, and you get it smaller and those parts get simpler. The reason is that for a display that the smaller the fold, then the bigger the difference between the inside and the outside. And that's what causes the tearing stress across the display.
So I've seen Google with a great hinge, and their foldable folds flat.
Yeah.
Also the Honor folds flat.
Yeah.
And also Samsung is almost there with fold flat after 6 generations.
After 6 generations, which shows that this is not easy to do.
Okay. How do you see the industry going forward with foldable phones?
I think that the question now is always about software. So,
really?
Yeah, a phone is a software device.
Okay.
And if you can make software that takes advantage of the fold, then it becomes really attractive. It has to be useful. I think that the phones that fold into a tablet format is really interesting. I still don't think we're quite finished on this, so maybe you end up with a Z Fold phone, or is it a diptych type one with two sides that fold in, or is it a double Z Fold? You know, a lot of this is about cost, and I think people finding software formats that work with it.
So you're saying it's actually the hinge? That's the main issue now?
Yeah.
But also going forward, you see even bigger foldable phones with more hinges and more folds.
Potentially more hinges and more folds, because then I think you maximize the advantage then. Just imagine having an 8-inch tablet in a 4-inch phone format.
Yeah.
Most of the time you just need the little screen. You know,
Yes.
For example, you're walking down the street and you want navigation, that's fine, you just use the little screen. When you then say climb onto a train and you then actually want to read some documents or watch some video, then you want to fold it out. So I think it's as small as possible and as big as possible.
Okay.
and it's that trade-off between the two.
You've been telling me that it's mostly about software going forward. So you're actually looking at the industry for a long time. Are we at peak screen technology? Do you only need software on top of this? What is the problem with foldable phones not taking over? Because everybody's wearing one of these.
Yeah.
You have a smartphone, not a foldable.
Right. I think in the end that's because of software. And you're using the phone to do things. Okay. And that is the function of the phone is defined by the software. It's the reason why you replace your phone after 2, 3, 4 years is because it can't run the software that you want it to. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not that it stopped working.
Yes.
And okay, these things have hard lives, but it's in the end it's about software compatibility and that you can do more things with new processors, but ultimately it's new software.
So that's why it's not growing. Do you think we need a major shift in how we approach software for smartphones?
I think it's the combination of the software and the user interface. I think where we've got to in phones is that the combination of the user interface and the software is now limiting what you can do with a phone. This, I think, is where AI comes in. So are we about to enter the post-touch screen era where suddenly you just wear your earbuds and you say to the phone, take me to so-and-so, you do the navigation by that and it relays it more with a voice interface.
Okay.
Yeah. Do we all want to be walking around the street like this for our navigation, or would we rather just have it told to us in one ear? So I think this is where the software AI, if you want to call it that, let's just call it bigger capabilities. AI is becoming a marketing term. Let's just think about what it does. So entering the next stage beyond the touch screen. The touch screen's never going to go away, but there are some tasks where you don't really need a screen if you could just be told what to do, if you could hear it.
Of course.
And that I think is the bit where we can do tasks in different ways. It's defined by the software, and that's the interesting part.
But again, I can see the software limitations on larger screens.
Yeah.
Like Apple is hanging on to iOS, iPadOS, and then macOS. When you enlarge a screen, you want to do more productivity.
Right.
You've told us that the larger the screen, the longer the time
The
you
longer
spend.
you watch it for, yeah. And that's self-fulfilling, because you also, if you're going to sit down for an hour to do a productivity, you want a bigger screen.
Yes.
So that I think the screen size defines the task, and the task defines the screen size.
Okay. Good to remember.
Yeah. So they're self-reinforcing. For some things, I think it's now having the imagination say, let's go into a post-screen age, post-screen usages. And of course, the boundaries between phones at one end, tablets in the middle, PCs at the far end is blurring all the time.
Yes.
The computing power in this phone is absolutely fine for running Excel and Word and all those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The common productivity apps. The only problem is the screen.
Of course.
So I think we will continue to see people try and cross those boundaries and blur those a bit. And maybe with foldable screens, you can get to something that's like using a tablet and it's with a phone. And the work then turns into a user interface that works.
Yeah.
If you can dictate documents really, really reliably, and again, we're talking about more computing power. Some people would call that AI.
Again.
Again. Then I think you're into some interesting ones. But I think we're now into the limitation of this format.
Yeah.
You can't make phones too big because you're limited by people's hand size and their pocket size.
It's always been an issue.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs didn't want to go beyond the iPhone
Right.
5
Yeah, exactly.
because the thumb.
Because of the thumb.
Because
Yeah.
of the thumb.
And even on the phablet category, if you remember 10 years ago, there were a lot of the really super size ones. We found that what matters is this size. If you're a woman in Asia, then you've got much smaller hands. And certainly at some stages, some of the phablets were so big that about a third of women in Asia just didn't have big enough hands to pick them up and hold them comfortably.
Yes.
So,
But again, women in Asia were the first to embrace the phablet.
yeah, absolutely, because they have a small bag. Lots of people travel by public transport, and you want one device, not two.
Oh, okay, so then two hands.
So then people started using them like that.
Okay, let's go a little bit into business intelligence,
Yeah.
your, let's say, specialty. By now, everybody stopped talking about an Apple Foldable. Should we? Should we forget about an foldable iPhone?
Apple will move when Apple decides it wants to, and I think what Apple, you always see, they don't do technology for technology's sake. They will build it in with a complete value proposition with software that does something extra and special.
Okay.
And
6 years later, come on.
they'll do it when they see there's a really big opportunity out of it.
But do you see any information from the manufacturers that they're offering screens to Apple?
Oh, everybody always is going to be offering screens to Apple, and Apple will play with those technologies and see what they can do with them, and can they release something new and reveal it.
There's something in the lab.
Oh, there always is. And we, Apple have bought TV panels over the years to have a go and play at what they could do with TVs. Could they do something different with it? Could they do something that really unlocks extra value? Oh, well, it turned out all that you could do with an Apple TV box.
And then they killed the project. They actually had an Apple TV.
I think we've got to be very careful not to assume that every project they do has an intention to produce a product. Often it's to understand something better.
Okay.
And of course, if you're working for a panel maker and you've just sold 200 panels to Apple as samples, then you're going to be saying, "Hey, it's going to happen." Yeah. And so I think people often misunderstand that it's not just Apple, Google and Microsoft and all these, Intel. They all take these technologies, they play with them, they recombine them, and they see what they can do with them. Can they do something different, or is it really just more of the same?
Let me dig a little bit on this, because I've seen Google expanding now their smartphone category also with a foldable, with a proper foldable.
Yeah.
Their latest 9 Pro Fold is actually a good Pixel phone. They're also expanding in markets. If I see Google making moves in new markets, I assume they know Apple is coming from behind with a foldable phone. That's my understanding.
It may be, or they may be saying, hang on, we can get an advantage on this one by reinventing the phone in a different way. I think that where we see Google, or where I see Google with its Pixel ranges, it's a bit like Intel, which is that they want to pull all their partners along, show what's available, develop new things. The PC industry is very efficient, but it's a low margin business, and it's very hard for PC vendors to actually design new PC concepts. Intel does that. Yeah, and Intel believe that they have to do that for the industry, so they can pull the industry along.
Okay.
Ultrabook's being a really good example where.
But again, Google is being competitive. Their Pixel Fold is priced out there with the Samsung and the Honor.
Yeah, and they're challenging everybody else who is making Android phones to say, come along, you can do this as well. And that allows them to develop the software and the toolkits and everything else. I mean, if you remember when the very early foldable phones came out, the problem was the software didn't keep up. And what does should the app do when it's folded, open and closed? And and that was really the software challenge on it. And that's why Google did that, to learn how to do that. And I think it's the same one that it allows them to a test bed for Android and their whole system, to look at it, to challenge their own partners, and to help their partners do that.
course.
Because if they feel the pain and solve the problem, that will help all their partners.
Okay. For the past decade, we've been talking about screens.
Yep.
At first, you were at your best when talking about TVs.
Yep.
And then we are talking about that shift from Full HD to 4K.
Yep.
It seems like we are stuck in 4K for the past decade. Are we going into 8K anymore?
When you look at the numbers of TVs that shipped, then 8K peaked in 2022. So 23 was less.
Okay.
Even though, and okay,
Really?
the TV market is struggling. You know, with post-pandemic, and consumers are
Going out.
counting the pennies and the cents.
Okay.
But 8K share is not growing. That's very definite. Why? Because there's no content.
True.
And
We had the Olympics. We had
Yeah.
the football
Yeah.
championships. Nothing.
no, I mean the Olympics are there were some selected things in 8K. It's very expensive to make, to shoot it. The lenses are incredibly expensive. It's incredibly expensive to transport
Yes.
and deliver. And ultimately, there aren't enough people with 8K TVs to make it worthwhile.
Okay.
You need a very, very big screen.
Yes, to enjoy.
Yeah,
8K.
if 40-inch is the entry size for 4K, then 80-inch should be the entry size for 8K.
Again, good. Note to self: no 8K TVs under 80 inch.
Yeah,
88.
yeah, absolutely. You know, it's and that's the problem. And I think 8K is also something very, very different. It's like IMAX cinema at home.
Okay.
And you know, the number of TVs that ship in Europe at 85-inch and bigger is still very small.
Because it's a logistics problem, not a technical problem
It's-
anymore.
It's a consumer acceptance problem. A lot of people won't have houses big enough. How much more furniture do you want to move to put an 80-inch or 100-inch TV
Yeah.
into your house? Do you want to spend your money on that? They're very, very large in the box. So this is
That's a problem for shipping, from what I'm hearing from the industry.
yeah, absolutely. You know that you will not be able to take it home in your car. You know that it has to be delivered to your house, taken out of the box in the street, and at that stage, it also needs to really be hung on the wall.
And it doesn't fit inside most elevators. Most elevators won't fit an 80+ inch TV.
That's certainly, you can get 85-inch in on its side. We did check on the building codes, but 100-inch I think is pushing it.
Okay.
That you can get it in most apartment blocks in the goods elevator, but
Okay.
it depends on the building code in each country and how old the building is. So I think it's a marginal one. Probably not really for Europe. US, yes, eventually. But the prices are coming down incredibly fast. So
I could see that. So they're becoming cheaper and cheaper.
Yep.
Although logistics is a nightmare, transporting and putting them inside the house, but also prices are coming lower.
Yeah.
So is technology good enough already?
I think that is the heart of the question about 4K and 8K, which is we're at a time where all the technology is good enough. The industry goes in starts and stops. We've gone through 15 years of incredible innovation. We're now limited actually by the cost of the content or physical size and things like that. And we go into a bit of a quiet time again. And then it will restart. Think about audio, and this is the example I always use. Sony and Philips invented CD in the late 1970s.
Okay.
We then spent all the 1980s making CD cheaper and more accessible, and people changed their music libraries until you got to the mid 1990s, when all that happened then was that the cost of music systems, audio systems, hi-fi systems went down and down and down. Until people then worked out that you could start to put your entire music collection in your pocket in, say, around about 2000.
Yes.
And at that stage, then the whole thing took off again with MP3 players and so on.
Okay.
But for 20 years, between 1980 and 2000, there was nothing really new in audio. And CD was so fantastic as a format that it was very, very hard to offer people something better than CD. People either couldn't hear the difference,
Yes.
or they wouldn't pay for the difference, or both.
Yes.
And you know, because you just had so much information at the beginning, you could throw some away in it along the way, and it still sounded pretty good at the end of it.
Exactly.
And I think that's where we are on TV. That we're about the economics. Most people are watching clean 1080p on streaming services, on HD broadcast, and it's
How
good
do you
enough.
define that clean 1080p? Because I'm looking at 4K on Netflix and it's rubbish.
Yeah.
1080p is also not that great. When I switch to Amazon Prime, the difference is striking.
Right.
And again, I have only a 4K TV that's been great for the past 6 years. Didn't need to change it.
Right. Absolutely. So the limitation now on your viewing experience is the bit rate that you're getting from your
Bit
TV
rate.
provider. Interestingly, on that, then even there, you one of the things you could do is with the same bit rate, you encode it with a more modern codec. So instead of H.264 AVC, you could go to HEVC or even VVC. In reality, the cost of delivering it is still coming down.
Okay.
So actually, there isn't even the pressure to go to more complicated codecs at the moment, because the cost just of delivering the existing ones is still coming down.
Even Germany is switching to fiber broadband, real broadband.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good example that you see the fiber coming in. So it's no longer a downstream problem that you're throttled. And even on the cost of delivering from the phone exchange for the last couple of kilometers, actually that cost is still coming down. So there isn't the pressure on that one. And I think the other one is that when you look at consumers and you look at Netflix or Amazon or indeed all the other ones, consumers say, I'd rather pay less and have ads. I don't want to pay for the extra quality. And so there isn't the consumer pressure because the consumers consider it good enough.
So again, if I want the best quality, I still need to go and buy WAVs like FLAC, uncompressed audio, or movies are not the best quality on streaming. So there's still a very, very small niche for people that really want the best quality they can get.
For people who really care, then yes, go out and still buy UHD Blu-rays.
UHD Blu-rays are still a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally, I think often the difference when you see with the uncompressed audio is that somebody's gone in and done the mastering properly and put some real love into it. You know, back in the day with CDs, we always knew that CDs that were recorded and mastered digitally always sounded better than ones that were all the way through the audio and you just digitize it at the end and throw it onto a CD.
Yes.
So I think most of the difference that people are hearing, and you can hear a difference, is about the level of love that's gone into the production.
Yes.
And certainly the other one was that a lot of vinyl records, when you go back to those original masters, they were bad. They were badly produced. And so something with CD, it was so much more transparent.
Yes.
And you then see these new uncompressed ones that actually people have done production properly.
So, look, we've been going through screens.
Yeah.
What else excites you when you look at the industry now?
I think that...
Projectors, maybe?
Sorry?
Projectors? Laser projectors?
No, I think laser projectors are a very, very brief thing.
Okay.
100-inch TVs, you can buy a 100-inch TV in China for $1,200 this afternoon if you wanted to.
Yes, exactly.
So, I think projection's moment came and gone. I still think that direct view screens look better than projection. There's a different feeling if you want to go and watch a movie-like experience at home, with projection. Okay, that's a bit of fun. That's like playing vinyl records. Yeah.
Okay, same thing, same experience.
It's an experience thing. It's not about the performance. It's about the experience.
Yeah.
I think that everybody is trying to work out what smart home is all about.
Okay.
And you can produce some quite convincing ideas and value propositions about energy saving and things like that. But I want to be unaware of the technology. I don't want my phone to buzz and say my washing machine is now finished and I need to go and empty it. I don't want it to tell me I'm going to go and run the dishwasher in the middle of the night. I just want it to just do it. Yeah.
Just do it. I don't care.
And I think there is a problem that energy management in the home is becoming complicated. So let's say you're a fairly early adopting consumer and you have solar panels on your roof. You have a green electricity supplier that you can sell electricity to and buy from. And you've got an electric vehicle, and you've probably got, let's say, a battery power wall type product in your home as well. So it's a beautiful day here in Berlin. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun is shining. Do you want to sell electricity to the grid? Do you want to charge the car? Do you want to charge the house, or do you want to do the washing? Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to know. I just want it to do it. And I want it to do it in the most profitable way for me.
Exactly.
Oh, and by the way, when I turn the power bank off because I need to change a wall outlet, I want to make sure that the solar panel doesn't electrocute me in all this. So you see that everything's got electricity now moving both ways. So this is actually a very complicated thing that you need to have to move this electricity and energy around your home and to your vehicle or whatever, and your batteries and your consumption in real time, with your best outcome for you in mind. And it's not trivial. And I think that's going to be a major thing. Is it a consumer product? Well, we'll have one in our house, but I don't want to know about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could see companies trying to make better and better, let's say, systems that can integrate all that, because they're doing different things. You're moving from DC to AC, so direct current to alternative, different voltages. You need storage, you need charging, you need discharging, you need inverters and whatnot. It's a very complicated system. And you need to put, if you can, all this into one. So, which works on its own. You don't need to know how it works. But it works in your best interest.
Exactly.
And it's profitable. It needs to be profitable. I see the future of the home as a profit source.
Or you can call it something that that offsets your consumption.
At least.
I mean, one of my colleagues, she lives in Silicon Valley. She has an electric car, she has solar panels on the roof, and her electricity bill each month is about $2.
Okay.
And she drives everywhere in her electric car.
I can beat that. My electricity bill is minus 200.
There you go. Yeah, and that's working in your interest. So
exactly.
So I think that's going to be the next thing. I mean, you look, for example, at Google Nest. It used to be a consumer product.
Okay.
You could go into a shop and you could buy it. Nest is now basically only sold through custom installers. You can buy it at retail. It's hard to find. Why? Because Google's realized that this is just the beginning of a much bigger problem, and it needs to be custom installed, and it's part of a system.
Okay. And you also need power management, not only temperature management.
Exactly. The temperature management is just the tip of the iceberg, and that underneath that is what are you doing with the rest of the energy.
And AI should work for that.
Here's hoping.
or better machine learning or any kind of automation.
Yeah, and I think that in all these things that really work is you need to be unaware of the technology. You don't want to be aware of the technology, it should just work.
So that's you're passionate actually about energy saving and automation. We've been talking about smart homes in these events for the past decades.
Yep.
Is it actually happening?
Yes, it's happening, but it's now at the stage where I think taking it from early adopters who want to play with the technology to the rest of us who want to just use it is the big task, and that is not simple.
It is. It's not.
And to quote Coco Chanel, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Well, there you have it.
And I think that's where we're going to, is that the really sophisticated problems now will be really simple.
Okay.
If you think about cars originally, when cars first came out, 100, 110 years ago, you used to have to be really involved with what the car was doing and how the car worked. Now you just turn a key. Yeah, and that's...
Just the other day, they launched ASS.
Yeah.
S, actually smart someone. Car comes. The car comes to you.
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything. Just you call the car. So we're there yet. The technology is maturing. Again, we've been talking about all kinds of the new technologies going forward. How excited are you actually about AI? The potential of real AI?
I think we're trying to work out. We've got these powerful technologies that are beginning. We're not quite sure what they're for. there are some things you can do already. So take, for example, editorial things where you're reporting just numbers, say, the entire football league scores, then AI can do that, and it could then produce a news bulletin or like stock prices or things like that. I think we're beginning to play with the pieces and work out what they're really for.
Okay.
At the same time, we also realize that no technology is perfect, and that we're beginning to explore the bits where it falls over. I'm in a really fascinating discussion at the moment with Mike Zink, who used to work for Warner Brothers and in the UHD Alliance, about what is creativity and is AI really creative, and what does AI creativity look like? And I think that's the interesting one, because AI is just trained on all the data that you have, so it's just more of the same.
For now.
For now, yeah. So can AI create something truly original? That's an interesting question, because at the moment it can't. I've heard a lot in the last few months that the amount of training data for AI has finished. The internet is empty. You've used the whole internet now, so what happens next?
What happens next? Because I'm hearing more and more about a digital god.
Yeah. So I think we've sort of got to, if you can compare it to something like, say, electricity, 100, 110 years ago, that everybody had this powerful new technology, they didn't know what it was for, and then after that you suddenly realized there were some unexpected things that came out. So unexpected productivity gains, unexpected ways that you changed things, and that will probably be where we end up.
So using all your experience in manufacturing and software and all that, looking at new technology, you compare it with the first few years of electricity.
Yeah, I think so. If AI
Just
has
as
the potential that people say it has, then it is a change in productivity like electrification. But electrification took a long time. Yeah.
Okay. So we still have time to embrace it.
We're really at the beginning stage. We're not even at the stage between Edison and Westinghouse working out whether it should be DC or AC.
Okay.
Yeah. We're probably at that stage where it certainly didn't have a grid. I think we're just at the beginning of playing with it. We're probably at just the first, very, very first things.
It's going to go faster than that.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that, like any other human created thing, then AI will not solve the problems of society.
Not yet.
No, I don't believe it ever will. 20 years ago, I heard all this about the internet. Yeah, and guess what? The internet being created by people showed all the human flaws, and we've got hate and crime and pornography. And all those, theft, and all those things that reflect human beings' failings were on the internet. And there will be exactly the same things with AI, that people will use it to steal. People will use it for fraud.
They do it already.
And they do it already, absolutely.
Impersonation, deepfakes.
Why? Yeah, exactly. And why? Because it will just reflect us, because that reflects humanity. It will not solve our problems. It will not be a substitute for people acting honestly and in good faith. It won't. Sadly, it won't make you or me
obsolete,
better people, and it won't make us obsolete either. Because I don't think that AI, for example, will come up with something like Picasso and a way of seeing like Picasso or Mondrian or something like that.
Okay. So you're not retiring yet?
No.
And the rest of your career seems to be okay. You're going to be fine. You're still going to have something to work on.
Oh well, there's always plenty to work on, and I think you see pauses. It's not a innovation is not a continuum. It goes in starts and stops.
Okay.
And yeah, we've had sort of 5 years of not quite knowing what happens next. We're now going into AI. Maybe that's the next thing. Maybe it turns out to be more complicated.
Okay.
Do you remember what people were saying 10 years ago about electric cars?
Yes.
And they would all be riding in autonomous vehicles now. Well, that turned out to be much more complicated
Yes.
than people thought, or they overestimated their abilities to solve these problems.
Okay. So be optimistic, but not too enthusiastic. Curb your enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my job's to spread unhappiness and just be a bit miserable and skeptical about these things, and wonder whether many of the problems are actually much more complicated and difficult than we think.
Okay, so then what's the worst problem we need to address as soon as possible, in your opinion?
Well, apart from human nature, no, I think the challenge of sustainability is the biggest and most pressing one.
Which one?
Everything. So energy consumption,
Okay.
climate change, and living greener, more sustainable lives. You know,
Okay.
Climate change is definitely happening. We've just seen the difference in weather in people's home countries this week.
No, I've never
and-
seen Berlin that hot in September.
Yeah, that's right. And at the same time, then there were forecasts for very, very heavy rain in northern Italy. So, I think those things are really the biggest challenge.
Okay. Paul Gray, thank you for your time.
Okay.
Always
Thank
a
you very much,
pleasure.
George. Yeah. Cheers.
So thank you, everyone. This has
Okay.
been a conversation with Paul Gray, one of the greatest researchers we know, still working for Omdia now.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to give you his contact details underneath. And again, I will see you for the next one. Like, share, and subscribe. Bye-bye.
Okay.